A poor little girl is selling her worn-out dolls on the sidewalk when a millionaire CEO passes by and stops. He gently asks why she's out there, and she replies with teary eyes, "Mum just died. I need money to eat." Shaken to the core, he adopts the girl, only to uncover a shocking truth. She's his own daughter from a forgotten love. Their reunion changes both lives forever. Just before we start, drop a flag emoji that represents your country. Jonathan Pierce stood frozen on the sidewalk, his Italian leather shoes suddenly feeling heavy against the concrete. The sight before him defied everything his rational mind could process. A small girl, no more than 8 years old, sat cross-legged on a tattered blanket, carefully arranging a collection of dolls around her like precious treasures at a makeshift market. Her golden hair caught the afternoon sunlight, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Crystal blue eyes that held a maturity far beyond her years, eyes that had seen too much, too soon. She wore a pink dress that had once been beautiful, now faded and slightly too small, and her tiny hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to survive. "Dolls for sale?" she called out in a voice barely above a whisper, but with a dignity that made Jonathan's chest tighten. Beautiful dolls for loving homes. Jonathan found himself walking toward her, his usual hurried pace slowing to match the gravity of the moment. Other pedestrians rushed past, their eyes glued to phones, their minds occupied with the endless demands of city life. But something about this child's quiet desperation had reached through his armor of wealth and responsibility, demanding his attention. The October air carried the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain, and Jonathan noticed how the little girl shivered slightly in her thin dress. She had positioned herself near the entrance to Central Park, where the foot traffic was heaviest, but far enough from the street to avoid the attention of authorities who might ask uncomfortable questions. "Hello there," he said gently, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "These are beautiful dolls. Are you sure you want to sell them?" The little girl looked up at him, studying his face with those impossibly wise eyes. Her assessment was thorough and careful, the evaluation of someone who had learned that strangers could be dangerous. "Yes, sir. They need to find new homes where they can be loved properly. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she replied, her small voice carrying a strength that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Lily Mitchell." Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite grasp. The way she held her head, the shape of her eyes, even the stubborn set of her small jaw. It all whispered of recognition just beyond his reach. "Lily, can I ask you something? Why are you selling your dolls? They look very special to you." For the first time, Lily's composure cracked slightly. Her lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly before she straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "My mama just died," she said with devastating simplicity. "The funeral man said it costs money to bury people properly. I want to make sure she gets to heaven the right way." The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. His successful morning, his important meetings, his multi-million-dollar deals, everything suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of this child's pure, heartbreaking love. He watched as she carefully adjusted the dress on one of her dolls, a blonde one with a torn hem that looked remarkably like a smaller version of herself. "Lily," he whispered, his voice rougher than intended. "Where are you staying now? Who's taking care of you?" "Mrs. Patterson from down the hall said I could sleep on her couch for a few days, but she has 6 kids already. She said I need to figure something out soon." Lily's voice remained steady, but Jonathan could see the fear lurking behind her brave facade. "But it's okay. Mama always said I was strong enough to take care of myself." Jonathan felt his world shift on its axis. Here was a child facing impossible circumstances with more grace than most adults he knew. The successful CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, found himself on his knees on a dirty sidewalk, looking into the eyes of someone who had just redefined courage for him. "Lily," he said, his voice barely steady, "what if I told you that you didn't have to sell your dolls? What if I told you that there might be another way?" Lily's eyes widened, a flicker of hope dancing across her face before she quickly suppressed it. She had learned not to trust easily, not to believe in promises that sounded too good to be true, but something about this man's voice, the genuine pain she saw reflected in his eyes, made her want to believe. "What do you mean, mister?" she asked, her small hands unconsciously gripping the edge of her blanket. Jonathan struggled to find the right words. He was a man of action, of quick decisions, but this moment required a delicacy he wasn't sure he possessed. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, car horns honking, people shouting into phones, the distant sound of construction. But in this small bubble of sidewalk, time seemed suspended. "My name is Jonathan Pierce, Lily, and I think maybe we could help each other." "Help each other?" Lily repeated, tilting her head with curiosity that was achingly childlike despite her circumstances. "Yes," Jonathan said, his mind racing even as his heart made a decision his rational self couldn't fully explain. "You see, I have a very big house, much too big for just one person, and you need a home. What if? What if you came to stay with me? What if we figured out this whole taking care of each other thing together?" Lily stared at him for a long moment, her young mind working through implications that no 8-year-old should have to consider. She had been taught to be wary of strangers, especially men who made grand promises. But there was something different about this one, something in his eyes that spoke of genuine kindness rather than hidden motives. "But you don't even know me," she said finally. "And I don't know you. Mama always said not to go with strangers." "Your mama was absolutely right," Jonathan replied, impressed by her caution. "She sounds like she was a very smart woman who loved you very much. How about this? What if we start by taking care of your mama's funeral arrangements together? No strings attached. And then, if you feel comfortable, maybe we can talk about what comes next." The mention of her mother broke through Lily's careful composure. For the first time since he'd approached her, tears spilled down her cheeks as the weight of her loss hit her anew. "I just want to make sure she knows I love her," she whispered. "I want to make sure she's not sad up in heaven because I couldn't afford a pretty funeral." Jonathan felt his own eyes burn with unshed tears. Without thinking, he reached out and gently wiped a tear from Lily's cheek with his thumb. "Oh, sweetheart, your mama already knows how much you love her. Love like yours doesn't need expensive things to prove itself. But if it would make you feel better, let's make sure she has the most beautiful send-off we can give her." Lily looked at him through her tears, something shifting in her expression. In her short life, adults had made promises they couldn't keep, had disappointed her in ways that cut deep. But this man, this stranger who had stopped when everyone else walked by, felt different. "Why would you do that for someone you don't even know?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Jonathan paused, feeling the truth of his answer settle into his bones. Because sometimes life puts people exactly where they need to be, exactly when they need to be there. And right now, I think we both need each other more than we realize. As if drawn by some invisible force, Lily leaned forward and wrapped her thin arms around Jonathan's neck. He held her gently, feeling her small body shake with sobs she had been holding back for far too long. Over her head, he saw her collection of dolls spread out on the blanket, innocent victims of adult failures, just like the precious child in his arms. "Pack up your dolls." "Lily," he whispered into her hair, "they're staying with you, all of them. Where you go, they go." Lily pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. What she saw there must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Mr. Jonathan." As Jonathan helped Lily carefully pack her dolls back into a small cardboard box, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would be remembered as the day his life truly began. 3 days later, Jonathan stood in the back of Rosewood Memorial Chapel, watching Lily say goodbye to her mother. He had insisted on handling every detail: the mahogany casket, the spray of white lilies that matched her name, the gentle music that filled the small space with something approaching peace. But it was Lily herself who had insisted on speaking, her small voice carrying across the chapel with a strength that left everyone present in tears. "Mama was the best mama in the whole world," Lily said, standing on a small step stool so she could reach the podium. Her voice was clear and strong, though Jonathan could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the wooden stand. "She worked 3 jobs to take care of me, and she never complained. She always said that love was the most important thing, and that as long as we had love, we had everything." She paused, wiping her nose with a tissue that looked comically large in her tiny hands. The chapel was nearly full. Neighbors who had known Rebecca Mitchell, co-workers from the diner where she'd worked nights, even some of the children Lily had played with in their rundown apartment building. Jonathan was surprised by how many lives this young mother had touched in her brief time on Earth. "I know she's watching me now," Lily continued, her eyes finding Jonathan's in the back of the room, "and I want her to know that Mr. Jonathan is going to help take care of me. She doesn't have to worry anymore." The words hit Jonathan like arrows to his chest. Over the past 3 days, as he'd helped Lily navigate the impossible world of funeral arrangements and legal guardianship, he'd watched her display a grace and maturity that humbled him. She grieved deeply, but without self-pity, loved fiercely but without expectation, and trusted cautiously but completely once that trust was earned. The funeral director, a kindly man in his 60s named Harold Simmons, had been remarkably helpful with the expedited adoption paperwork. Jonathan's lawyers had worked around the clock to ensure everything was legal and proper, while social workers had conducted their investigations with unprecedented speed. Money, Jonathan had learned, could indeed move mountains when applied with the right pressure. After the service, as mourners filed past the casket to pay their respects, an elderly woman approached Jonathan. She was small and weathered, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You're the man who's taking in our Lily," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. Jonathan Pierce." He extended his hand, which she shook with surprising strength. "I'm Martha Patterson. I've been watching that little girl grow up in the apartment next to mine for the past 5 years. She studied his face with the same intensity Lily had shown on the sidewalk. "Rebecca was a good mother, Mr. Pierce. She loved that child more than life itself." "I can see that," Jonathan replied quietly. "She also carried a lot of pain. About Lily's father, about choices she'd made." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "She never said much about him, but she kept his picture. Used to stare at it sometimes when she thought no one was looking." Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. Did she ever mention his name? Martha shook her head. Only that he was a good man, who'd gotten lost somehow. She said maybe someday Lily would understand. The older woman's gaze sharpened. "You take good care of that little girl, Mr. Pierce. She's been through more than any child should have to bear." "I will," Jonathan promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As they drove through the quiet streets toward his estate after the service, Lily pressed her face against the window of his car. She clutched the blonde doll, the one she'd told him was named Isabella, and stared out at the world passing by. "Mr. Jonathan?" she said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mama would be happy that I'm coming to live with you?" Jonathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing the uncertainty in her young face. "I think your mama would be very happy that you're safe and cared for. That's what mothers want most for their children." Nay. When they arrived at his estate, a sprawling mansion in the hills overlooking the city, Lily's eyes grew wide with wonder. The house sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with gardens that bloomed year-round and a fountain that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. "This is where you live?" she whispered. Her small hand pressed against the car window. "It's like a palace." "It's where we live now," Jonathan corrected gently, taking her small hand in his as they walked up the stone steps to the front door. "Come on, let me show you your room." The house had always felt too large to Jonathan, too empty despite its grandeur. He'd bought it 5 years earlier, envisioning a future that had never materialized. A wife, children, the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. Instead, it had become a monument to his loneliness, beautiful but hollow. Mrs. Henderson, his long-time housekeeper, met them at the door. She was a woman in her 50s with a warm smile and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from raising 4 children of her own. Jonathan had briefed her on the situation, and she'd immediately thrown herself into preparing for Lily's arrival. "You must be Miss Lily," she said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "I'm Mrs. Henderson, and I've been so excited to meet you." Lily hung back slightly, still clutching Isabella, but she managed a small smile. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. I've got some fresh chocolate chip cookies cooling in the kitchen if you'd like some later," Mrs. Henderson said conspiratorially. "But first, I think your daddy wants to show you something special." The word "daddy" still sent a shock of joy through Jonathan every time he heard it applied to him. He led Lily up the grand staircase, past oil paintings and crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light. Her eyes were wide with wonder, taking in every detail. "This house is so big," she said in amazement. "How do you not get lost?" "I did. The first few weeks I lived here," Jonathan admitted, making her giggle. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and the sound was like music. He stopped at a door painted soft lavender and pushed it open. Lily gasped as she stepped inside. The room was everything a little girl could dream of. Walls painted the color of twilight, with silver stars scattered across the ceiling. There were bookshelves filled with stories, a window seat with fluffy cushions that looked out over the gardens, and toys carefully arranged on white shelves. But it was the dollhouse in the corner that made Lily's breath catch. It was a perfect replica of the mansion itself, complete with tiny furniture and miniature gardens. "Is it really mine?" she asked, approaching it with the reverence of someone who had rarely owned anything new. "It's really yours. Everything in this room is yours, Lily. This is your home now." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Why are you so kind to me?" "I'm nobody special." Jonathan knelt down beside her, his heart breaking at the question. How could this extraordinary child think she was nobody special? "Lily Mitchell, you are the most special person I've ever met. You are brave and loving and strong, and any man would be honored to call you his daughter." The word "daughter" seemed to hang in the air between them, and Jonathan realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the past 3 days, that's exactly what she had become to him. Not through blood or law, but through something deeper, through choice and love and the mysterious workings of a universe that sometimes places exactly the right people in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. That night, as he tucked Lily into her new bed, she looked up at him with those incredible blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Daddy," she said softly. "Yes, baby girl. I'm scared that I'll forget what Mama looked like." Jonathan's heart clenched. Would it help if we made a special place to remember her? Lily nodded, and together they arranged a small table by her window with the few photos she had of her mother. Along with Isabella and a white candle that would burn every night in Rebecca's memory. 2 weeks into their new life together, Jonathan discovered that adopting Lily had been the easy part. Learning to be a father to a grieving 8-year-old who had been forced to grow up too fast was proving to be the challenge of his lifetime. The nights were the hardest. Lily would wake up screaming for her mother, and Jonathan would rush to her room to find her huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face, clutching Isabella so tightly her knuckles were white. "She's gone," Lily would whisper. "She's really gone, and I can't remember what her voice sounded like." Jonathan would sit with her, holding her until the trembling stopped, singing half-remembered lullabies his own mother had sung to him decades ago. Gradually, she would relax into his arms, and he would carry her back to bed, staying until her breathing evened out into sleep. But it wasn't just the grief they were navigating. There were practical challenges too. Enrolling her in Riverside Elementary, learning what 8-year-old girls like to eat, figuring out how to braid hair and help with homework. Jonathan, who could negotiate million-dollar deals in his sleep, found himself completely bewildered by the complexities of childhood. "Mr. Jonathan," Lily said one morning over breakfast, pushing her scrambled eggs around on her plate. They sat in the breakfast nook overlooking the gardens, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "At school, the other kids ask me about my dad." Jonathan paused in reading the financial section, his attention immediately focused on her. Over the past weeks, he'd learned to read her moods, to recognize when she was working up the courage to ask difficult questions. "What do you tell them?" "I tell them I don't have one, but then they ask about you, and I don't know what to say." She looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "What are you to me?" The question hit him harder than it should have. They had been so focused on the immediate needs, the funeral, the living arrangements, the legal paperwork, that they hadn't really talked about what their relationship was supposed to be. He was her legal guardian now. But what did that mean to an 8-year-old who had lost everything? "What would you like me to be?" he asked carefully. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. She was a child who had learned to think before she spoke, to weigh the consequences of her words. I think I'd like you to be my new daddy." "If that's okay. I know you're not my real daddy, but maybe you could be my heart daddy instead." Jonathan felt his throat close with emotion. "Your heart daddy? Yeah. Like how Isabella isn't a real baby, but she's my heart baby because I love her so much." Lily tilted her head, studying his face with that intense focus he was learning to recognize. "Would you like to be my heart daddy?" "Lily," Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion, "there is nothing in this world I would like more." Her face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen since they met, transforming her from a solemn little adult back into the child she should have been all along. "Then can I call you Daddy?" "You can call me anything you want, sweetheart." That afternoon, Jonathan found himself standing in the doorway of his home office, watching Lily play with her dolls on the Persian carpet. She had arranged them in an elaborate tea party, complete with plastic cups and saucers from a toy set Mrs. Henderson had found in the attic, and was having animated conversations with each of them. "Isabella, you have to use your manners," she was saying to the blonde doll, "and Sophie, don't interrupt when someone is talking." But she turned to another doll, one with dark hair and a torn dress. "Rachel, I know you miss your old home, but this is our home now, and we're safe here." Jonathan realized she was working through her own emotions using the dolls as proxies, and his heart ached for this child who had to be her own therapist at 8 years old. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening in November, exactly 1 month after Jonathan had found Lily on that sidewalk. They were working on a jigsaw puzzle together, a 1,000-piece image of a cottage garden that Lily had insisted on because it looks like somewhere Mama would have liked to live. The fireplace crackled in the background, and Mrs. Henderson had left them hot chocolate with marshmallows before retiring for the evening. It had become their nightly ritual, an hour of quiet time together before Lily's bedtime, a chance to talk about their day and simply be together. "Daddy," Lily said, carefully placing a piece of blue sky, "can I tell you something about Mama that might make you sad?" Jonathan paused in his search for corner pieces. Over the past weeks, he had learned that Lily often prefaced difficult conversations this way, as if she was protecting him from her own pain. "You can tell me anything, sweetheart, always." Mama used to cry sometimes when she thought I was asleep," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She would look at this picture she kept hidden in her jewelry box, and she would cry." Jonathan felt his heart skip a beat. Something cold began to form in the pit of his stomach. "What kind of picture?" "A picture of a man." "A man with eyes like mine." Lily looked up at him, her expression unusually serious. "I think it was my real daddy, the one who got lost." The puzzle piece slipped from Jonathan's fingers. Around them, the comfortable warmth of the room seemed to shift, becoming charged with possibility and dread in equal measure. "Did you ever ask her about it?" Lily shook her head. "I was scared it would make her sadder, but sometimes when she didn't know I was looking, she would trace his face with her finger and whisper his name." "Do you remember what name she said?" Jonathan asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. "Jonathan," Lily said simply. She always said Jonathan, and then she would cry harder. The world stopped. The fire continued to crackle. The rain continued to tap against the windows. But for Jonathan, everything had crystallized into this single, impossible moment. The familiarity he'd felt when he first saw her, the way her expressions tugged at half-forgotten memories, the nagging sense that he knew those eyes, it all suddenly made terrible, wonderful sense. "Lily," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "what was your mama's last name before she became Mitchell?" "Collins," Lily replied, watching his face with growing concern. "Mama's name was Rebecca Collins. Daddy, why do you look so scared?" Rebecca Collins. The name hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Rebecca with the golden hair and crystal blue eyes. Rebecca who had loved him with a fierce intensity that had terrified his younger self. Rebecca who had disappeared from his life 9 years ago when he'd been too proud and too scared to fight for what they had. Rebecca who had been pregnant and had never told him. Jonathan stared at the little girl sitting across from him, seeing not just the child he had chosen to love, but the daughter he had unknowingly abandoned. The daughter who had sold her dolls on a sidewalk to bury the mother who had raised her alone because he had been too much of a coward to bridge the gap between them. "Daddy!" Lily's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay?" How could he tell her? How could he explain that the father she thought was lost had been right there all along, living in his mansion while she and her mother struggled in poverty just across the city? How could he confess that he was the reason her mother had died heartbroken and alone? But as he looked into those incredible blue eyes, his eyes, Jonathan realized that the truth, no matter how painful, was what they both deserved. Jonathan sat in stunned silence, the weight of revelation crushing down on him like a physical force. The puzzle pieces scattered on the table seemed to mock him, fragments of a picture that would never be complete, just like the life he and Rebecca might have had together. Lily watched him with growing alarm, her small hand reaching across the table to touch his. "Daddy, you're scaring me," she whispered. "What's wrong? How could he explain? How could he tell this precious child that he was the father who had gotten lost, that he was the reason her mother had cried over hidden photographs? The guilt was suffocating him, making it hard to breathe. Rebecca had been pregnant when she left him 9 years ago, and he had been too proud, too stubborn to go after her. He remembered their last fight with crystal clarity now. They had been so young. He was 33, she was 24. They had been together for 2 years, living in his apartment downtown, talking about marriage and the future. But Jonathan had been consumed with building his empire, working 18-hour days, missing dinners and dates and all the small moments that make up a relationship. "You're never here, Jonathan," Rebecca had said that night, tears streaming down her face. "Even when you're here, you're thinking about work. I feel like I'm dating a ghost." "I'm doing this for us," he had replied, the same excuse he'd used 100 times before. "Everything I'm building is for our future." "What future?" she had shot back. "You can't even commit to a weekend away together, let alone a lifetime. I need someone who's present, Jonathan. I need someone who chooses me." And instead of fighting for her, instead of proving her wrong, he had let his pride take over. "If that's how you feel, maybe you should find someone else," he had said coldly. She had stared at him for a long moment, something dying in her beautiful blue eyes. "Maybe I should," she had whispered, and then she was gone. He had thrown himself into work even more desperately after that, telling himself he was better off alone. He had tried calling her a few times in the first week, but her phone had been disconnected. By the time he'd swallowed his pride enough to go to her apartment, she had moved out, leaving no forwarding address. And all this time, she had been pregnant with his child. "Daddy?" Lily's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. She had moved around the table and was standing beside his chair, her small face etched with worry. "Please talk to me." Jonathan pulled her onto his lap, holding her close as he struggled to find the words. She smelled like the lavender soap Mrs. Henderson used in her bath, and her hair was silk soft against his cheek. His daughter, his actual, biological daughter, who had been living in poverty while he sat in his mansion counting his money. "Lily," he said finally, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I need to tell you something very important, something that's going to change everything." She pulled back to look at him, those impossibly blue eyes, his eyes wide with apprehension. "What is it?" I know I was your mama's Jonathan, the one in the picture, the one who got lost." The words felt like glass in his throat. "Lily, sweetheart, I think I'm your real daddy." For a moment she just stared at him, processing what he'd said. Then her face crumpled and she began to cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears he'd seen her shed for her mother, but the raw, desperate sobs of a child whose world had just shifted on its axis again. "You knew," she wailed. "You knew and you didn't tell me? You knew Mama was sad, and you didn't come help her?" "No, baby, no," Jonathan said desperately, trying to hold her as she struggled in his arms. "I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know about you. If I had known, you would have come," she asked, her voice breaking with hope and accusation in equal measure. "I would have moved heaven and earth to get to you," he said fiercely. "Both of you. I would have never let you sell your dolls on the street. I would have never let your mama die, thinking I didn't love her." Lily's crying gradually subsided into hiccups, but she remained tense in his arms. "Why didn't she tell you about me?" It was the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. I think I hurt her so badly that she didn't think I deserved to know. And maybe she was right." "No," Lily said suddenly, turning in his lap to face him fully. "Mama always said people make mistakes, but that doesn't make them bad people. She said forgiveness was the most important thing after love." Jonathan felt tears spill down his cheeks. Even in death, Rebecca was teaching him lessons he desperately needed to learn. "Your mama was the wisest person I've ever known." They sat together in the firelight, father and daughter reunited by tragedy and bound by love. They were both still learning to understand. Outside, the November rain continued to fall, washing the world clean for tomorrow's possibilities. The next morning, Jonathan woke to find Lily standing beside his bed, clutching Isabella and staring at him with the intensity of someone who had been thinking all night. "I have questions," she announced without preamble. Jonathan sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He had barely slept, his mind churning with memories and regrets and the overwhelming responsibility of this new truth. "Of course you do, sweetheart. Ask me anything." She climbed onto his bed, settling cross-legged beside him with the seriousness of a judge preparing to render verdict. "If you're my real daddy, why do I look nothing like you?" Jonathan studied her face, the golden hair so much like Rebecca's, the delicate features that were purely her mother's creation. But those eyes, those were definitely his. "You look exactly like your mama, but you have my eyes. And when you concentrate really hard, you get a little line right here." He touched the spot between her eyebrows. "Just like I do." Lily touched the same spot on her own face. Considering this, what else do we have the same? "Well," Jonathan said, grateful for this easier line of questioning, "we're both stubborn as mules, and we both love puzzles, and we both have terrible handwriting." This earned him a small smile. "Mama said I got my terrible handwriting from my daddy's side." The casual mention of Rebecca hit him like a physical blow. She had kept him alive for Lily in small ways, acknowledging his existence even as she raised their daughter alone. "What else did she tell you about me?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, playing with Isabella's hair. "She said you were the smartest man she ever met, but that sometimes smart people think with their heads instead of their hearts. She said you weren't mean, just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of loving someone so much it might hurt." Lily looked up at him with those perceptive eyes. "She said she understood why you couldn't stay, but that she wished you had been brave enough to try." Jonathan felt like he was being flayed alive by the truth. Rebecca had understood him better than he had understood himself, had forgiven him even as she suffered for his cowardice. "I was scared," he admitted. "I was terrified of not being good enough for her, of disappointing her. So I pushed her away before she could leave me." "But she didn't want to leave you," Lily said simply. "She wanted you to choose her." "I know that now." Jonathan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "And I'm choosing you every day for the rest of my life. Can you forgive me for taking so long to find you?" Lily studied his face for a long moment, then leaned forward and hugged him tightly. "Mama always said forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing love instead of hurt." "I choose love, Daddy." The words broke something open in Jonathan's chest, releasing years of guilt and self-recrimination. He held his daughter close. This miraculous child who had inherited her mother's capacity for grace and wisdom. "I want to see the picture," he said suddenly. "What picture?" "The one your mama kept in her jewelry box. The one of me." Lily's face grew thoughtful. "Mrs. Patterson has all of Mama's things in boxes. She said she'd keep them until I was ready." "Do you want to go see her today?" Jonathan nodded, though the thought of facing Rebecca's belongings filled him with dread. "I think it's time I learned about the life I missed." 2 hours later, they stood outside the rundown apartment building where Rebecca and Lily had lived. The contrast to his estate was stark and painful: peeling paint, broken windows, the smell of poverty and desperation that hung in the air like fog. Mrs. Patterson answered her door with Lily in her arms before Jonathan could even knock. She was a small, weathered woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she studied Jonathan with the intensity of someone sizing up a potential threat. "So, you're him," she said without preamble, "the famous Jonathan." "Yes, ma'am," Jonathan replied, feeling like he was on trial. "Rebecca talked about you, you know, right up until the end." Mrs. Patterson's voice was neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply factual. "She never stopped loving you, though God knows she tried." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Patterson, I didn't know about Lily. If I had— Oh, I know that, the older woman interrupted. Rebecca made sure you didn't know. Said it was better that way, that you'd made your choice clear enough. She stepped aside to let them in, but she kept track of you. Read every article about your company, watched every interview. She was proud of you, even as her heart was breaking. Jonathan felt sick. While he had been building his empire, Rebecca had been raising their daughter in poverty, watching his success from afar and probably wondering if he ever thought of her. Mrs. Patterson led them to a small closet where she had carefully stored 3 cardboard boxes. Everything's here. Wasn't much, but she treasured what she had. With trembling hands, Jonathan opened the first box. Inside were photo albums, documents, and a small wooden jewelry box that looked like it had been loved for many years. Lily reached for the jewelry box, opening it with reverent care. Inside, nestled among a few simple pieces of costume jewelry, was a photograph. Jonathan's breath caught as he saw it, a picture of himself from 9 years ago, laughing at something off-camera. He remembered when it was taken. Rebecca had surprised him with a weekend trip to the coast, one of the few times he had actually turned off his phone and been present with her. But it wasn't just the photograph that stopped his heart. Wrapped around it was a hospital bracelet, the kind they give new mothers, and tucked beneath both was a letter, yellowed with age and written in Rebecca's careful handwriting. "My dearest Jonathan," it began. Jonathan's hands shook as he unfolded the letter, aware that Lily and Mrs. Patterson were watching him with equal intensity. The paper was soft with handling, as if Rebecca had read it many times over the years. "My dearest Jonathan," it read. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've instructed Mrs. Patterson to give this to you only if something happens to me and you somehow find your way to Lily. I pray that day never comes, but if it does, I need you to know some things. First, I never told you about our daughter because I was afraid. Afraid you would stay out of obligation rather than love. Afraid you would resent us both for trapping you in a life you hadn't chosen. You made it clear that you weren't ready for a commitment, and a baby is the ultimate commitment. But Jonathan, she is the most beautiful thing we ever created together. She has your eyes and your stubborn streak. But she got my heart. She loves deeply and trusts completely, and she deserves a father who will choose her every single day. I've made mistakes, my love. I should have told you about her. I should have given you the chance to prove me wrong about what kind of father you would be. But I was young and hurt and scared, and I made the choice I thought was best for everyone. If you're reading this, it means Lily needs you now. Please don't let your guilt or my past mistakes stop you from being the father she deserves. She is not a burden or an obligation. She is a gift, the greatest gift we could have given each other. I never stopped loving you, Jonathan. I tried, God knows I tried, but you were the only man who ever held my whole heart. I hope someday you can forgive me for keeping her from you. I hope someday you can forgive yourself for the choices that led us here. Take care of our baby girl. Love her enough for both of us. Forever yours, Rebecca P.S. Her favorite bedtime story is about a princess who saves herself. She doesn't believe in waiting for rescue. She creates her own happy endings. I hope you'll encourage that fierce independence even when it scares you. Jonathan finished reading through a blur of tears, the letter trembling in his hands. Lily was crying too, having read over his shoulder, and even Mrs. Patterson was wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "She loved you so much," Lily whispered. "Even when she was sad, she loved you." Jonathan pulled his daughter close, holding both her and the letter that was his final communication with the woman he had never stopped loving. "And I loved her. Baby girl, I was just too stupid and scared to fight for her when it mattered." "But you found me," Lily said, pulling back to look at him. "Maybe Mama knew you would find me when I needed you most." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat softly. "There's more," she said, reaching into the jewelry box and pulling out a small velvet pouch. "She wanted you to have this too." Inside the pouch was a ring, a simple silver band with a small diamond that Jonathan recognized immediately. He had given it to Rebecca for her birthday, 2 months before their relationship ended. It wasn't an engagement ring, but it had been a promise ring, his way of saying he was serious about their future together. "She never took it off," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Even when the bills were piling up and she could have sold it, she never took it off. Said it reminded her that she had been truly loved, even if it didn't last." Jonathan slipped the ring into his pocket. Another piece of evidence of the life he had thrown away. They spent the next hour going through Rebecca's belongings, photo albums chronicling Lily's childhood that he had missed, report cards showing his brilliant daughter's academic achievements, artwork and school projects that any father would have treasured. In the bottom of the second box, Lily found something that made her gasp with delight, a wooden photo frame containing a picture of her as a newborn, sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms. But what caught Jonathan's attention was what was written on the back in Rebecca's handwriting. Lily Rose Pierce Mitchell, born December 15th, 2015. Daddy's eyes, Mama's heart. Pierce Mitchell. She had given Lily his last name, even though she had never told him about her. "She was waiting," Jonathan realized aloud. "She gave you my name because she was waiting for me to come back." "But you never did," Lily said, not accusingly, but simply stating fact. "No," Jonathan admitted, "I never did. I was too proud and too afraid. But I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you again." As they packed up Rebecca's belongings to take home, Mrs. Patterson pulled Jonathan aside. "She made me promise something," the older woman said. "If anything ever happened to her, and if you ever came for Lily, I was supposed to tell you that she forgave you. For everything, and that she hoped you would forgive yourself." Jonathan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "And, Mr. Pierce," Mrs. Patterson added, "that little girl is the best of both of you. Don't you dare let guilt make you forget that she's a blessing, not a burden." As they drove home through the late afternoon sunlight, Lily clutched the photo of her as a newborn, while Jonathan tried to process everything he had learned. His daughter was silent for most of the ride, lost in her own thoughts about the mother she was still learning to understand. "Daddy?" she said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yes, sweetheart." "I think Mama would be happy that we found each other." "I think so too, baby girl." That night, as Jonathan tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with those incredible blue eyes and asked, "Will you tell me about the happy times? About when you and Mama were in love?" And so he did, sharing stories of the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life, even as she was breaking both their hearts. 3 weeks later, on a crisp December morning just 10 days before Lily's 9th birthday, Jonathan was in his home office when his assistant buzzed him with an urgent call. He almost ignored it. Lily was home with a cold, and he had been planning to spend the day with her, maybe building a fort in the living room or working on their latest puzzle. "Mr. Pierce," his assistant's voice was strained, "there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about Lily. Her name is Victoria Collins." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Collins, Rebecca's maiden name. "Send her up," he said, his voice barely steady. 5 minutes later, a woman who looked remarkably like Rebecca walked into his office. She was older, probably in her late 40s, with the same golden hair and blue eyes, but there was a hardness to her features that Rebecca had never possessed. "Victoria Collins," she introduced herself, not offering her hand. "Rebecca's older sister." Jonathan stood slowly, his mind racing. Rebecca never mentioned having a sister. "We weren't close," Victoria replied coolly, settling into the chair across from his desk without being invited. "In fact, we hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. Not since she got involved with some rich businessman and started putting on airs. The insult hit its mark, but Jonathan kept his expression neutral. "What do you want, Ms. Collins?" "I want my niece," Victoria said bluntly. "I've been doing some research since I heard about Rebecca's death." Imagine my surprise to discover that the Jonathan Pierce who adopted Lily is the same Jonathan Pierce who broke my sister's heart and left her to raise his child alone. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jonathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "I know that Rebecca was pregnant when she left you. I know that you never bothered to look for her. I know that while you were building your empire, she was working 3 jobs and living in poverty to support your daughter." Each word was like a dagger to his heart, because they were all true. "Where were you?" he asked quietly. "If you knew she was struggling, where were you? Rebecca was too proud to ask for help, but Lily is my blood, Mr. Pierce, my family, and I'm not going to let her be raised by the man who destroyed her mother." "Lily is happy here," Jonathan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "She's grieving, but she's safe and loved, and—" "She's living with a stranger," Victoria interrupted, "a stranger who happens to share her DNA, but who abandoned her and her mother when they needed him most. Do you really think a judge is going to look favorably on that when I contest the adoption?" The threat hung in the air between them like a blade. Jonathan felt his world tilting on its axis again, just when he had thought they were finding their equilibrium. "What do you want?" he asked again. "I want what's best for Lily, and what's best for her is to be raised by family who actually wanted her from the beginning." Victoria stood, smoothing her expensive skirt. "I'll be filing papers to contest the adoption by the end of the week. I suggest you use that time to say goodbye." After she left, Jonathan sat in his office staring out at the gardens where Lily loved to play. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Henderson hanging laundry on the line, humming softly to herself. It was a peaceful scene. Domestic and warm, everything he had never thought he wanted until Lily had come into his life. He found his daughter in her room, curled up on her window seat with a book and a cup of tea Mrs. Henderson had made her. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening despite her stuffy nose. "Daddy!" "I'm reading about this princess who disguises herself as a knight to save her kingdom. Want to hear?" Jonathan sat beside her on the window seat, pulling her close. How could he tell her that their newfound happiness was being threatened? How could he explain that someone was trying to take her away from him just when they were learning to be a family? "Lily," he said carefully, "do you remember your mamma ever mentioning an Aunt Victoria?" Lily's face scrunched up in thought. "I think so. Mama said she had a sister, but that they didn't talk anymore because Aunt Victoria was mean to her about having me without being married." Jonathan's jaw tightened. So Victoria had known about Lily all along and had chosen to turn her back on both Rebecca and her niece. Now she wanted to swoop in and play the concerned relative. "Why?" Lily asked, studying his face with that uncanny ability to read his moods. "Is something wrong?" Before Jonathan could answer, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Pierce, there are some men here to see you. They say they're from the family court." Jonathan's heart sank. Victoria hadn't wasted any time. "Tell them I'll be right down," he said. Then turned to Lily. "Baby girl, I need you to stay up here for a little while, okay? There are some grown-up things I need to handle." "Are they going to take me away?" Lily asked, her voice small and scared. The question hit him like a physical blow because he couldn't honestly tell her no. "I'm going to fight for you," he said fiercely. "With everything I have, I'm going to fight for you." "But what if you lose?" Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, looking into those blue eyes that were so much like his own. "Then I'll keep fighting. And if they take you, I'll find a way to get you back. I will never stop trying to bring you home." Promise? I promise, he said, sealing it with a kiss to her forehead. You are my daughter, Lily Rose Pierce. Nothing and no one is going to change that. But even as he said the words, Jonathan felt the cold grip of fear settling around his heart. Victoria was right about one thing. He had abandoned Rebecca and Lily, even if he hadn't known about his daughter at the time. A judge might very well decide that blood relation wasn't enough to overcome his past failures. As he walked downstairs to face the court officials, Jonathan realized he was about to fight the most important battle of his life. And this time, losing wasn't an option. The family court hearing was scheduled for December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas, and 5 days after Lily's 9th birthday. Jonathan had hired the best family law attorney in the city, a sharp woman named Patricia Brennan, who had never lost a custody case. But even she looked concerned as they sat in the courthouse waiting room. I won't lie to you, Jonathan, Patricia said. Reviewing her notes one final time, Victoria Collins has a strong case. She's blood family, she's never been in trouble with the law, and she's painting herself as the concerned aunt who tried to help but was rebuffed by a prideful sister. The fact that you didn't know about Lily for 8 years, that's going to be hard to overcome. But Lily wants to stay with me, Jonathan protested. Doesn't that count for something? It does, but she's only 9. The judge will consider her wishes, but the primary concern is what's in her best interest. And Victoria's lawyer is going to argue that being raised by family who didn't abandon her mother is in her best interest. Jonathan felt sick. He looked across the waiting room to where Lily sat with Mrs. Henderson, carefully colouring in a book to keep herself calm. She had insisted on coming to the hearing, despite Jonathan's attempts to shield her from the proceedings. I want to tell the judge myself, she had said, with that stubborn determination that reminded him so much of himself. I want to tell him that I choose you. When their case was called, they filed into a small courtroom that felt more like an office than the grand judicial chambers Jonathan had imagined. Judge Margaret Thompson was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes but a stern demeanor. She looked over her reading glasses at both parties as they took their seats. This is a petition to contest the adoption of Lily Rose Pierce Mitchell, she began. Ms. Collins, you may present your case first. Victoria's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, stood and began his opening statement. He painted a picture of Jonathan as a wealthy man who had assuaged his guilty conscience by adopting the child he had abandoned, while Victoria was presented as a loving aunt who had been kept away from her niece by a stubborn sister, but who now wanted to provide a stable, loving home. Your Honor, the lawyer concluded, this child deserves to be raised by family who has always wanted her, not by a man who is essentially a stranger trying to ease his guilt over past failures. It was brutal and effective, and Jonathan watched the judge's expression carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. Then it was Patricia's turn. Your Honor, she began, this case is not about blood relation or past mistakes. It's about love, stability, and what's truly in Lily's best interest. The petitioner, Ms. Collins, had 9 years to establish a relationship with this child. 9 years during which Lily and her mother struggled, during which they needed family support, during which Ms. Collins was notably absent from their lives. Patricia presented evidence of Jonathan's transformation since adopting Lily, how he had rearranged his work schedule to be present for her, how he had enrolled her in therapy to help with her grief, how he had created a loving, stable home environment. She showed photos of Lily's room, testimonials from her teachers about her improved academic performance and emotional well-being, and statements from Mrs. Henderson about the obvious love between father and daughter. Mr. Pierce may not have known about his daughter for the first 8 years of her life, Patricia concluded, but in the 2 months since he found her, he has proven himself to be the father Lily needs and deserves. Then came the testimony. Victoria took the stand first, speaking about her desire to honor her sister's memory by raising Lily herself. She painted herself as the stable, appropriate choice. A teacher with a modest but comfortable home, no history of abandoning family. A woman who understood the importance of consistency in a child's life. But under cross-examination, Patricia revealed the truth about Victoria's relationship with Rebecca. "Ms. Collins, when was the last time you spoke to your sister before her death?" "It had been several years," Victoria admitted reluctantly. "Several years? Wasn't it actually 9 years? Isn't it true that you cut off contact with Rebecca when she told you she was pregnant and unmarried? I thought she was making poor choices. And isn't it true that you knew she was struggling financially but never offered to help? Rebecca was too proud to accept help. But you never offered, did you? You never once reached out to your sister or your niece in 9 years, but now, suddenly you want custody." Victoria's composure began to crack. "I thought it was best to let her handle her own mistakes." "Her mistakes? You mean having a child?" "I mean getting involved with a man who would abandon her." The words hung in the air, and Jonathan felt the weight of their truth. But Patricia wasn't finished. "Miss Collins, if you truly believed Lily was a mistake, why do you want custody of her now?" Victoria's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Her true feelings about Lily had been revealed. When Jonathan took the stand, he didn't try to hide his past failures. He spoke honestly about his relationship with Rebecca, about his pride and fear that had driven her away, about the regret that had haunted him for 9 years. "I can't change the past," he said, looking directly at the judge. "I can't undo the pain I caused Rebecca or make up for the years I missed with Lily. But I can promise that I will spend every day for the rest of my life being the father she deserves. She has transformed my world, Your Honor. She has given my life meaning and purpose I never knew was possible." "Mr. Pierce," the judge asked, "what makes you think you won't abandon this child the way you abandoned her mother?" The question hit like a physical blow, but Jonathan answered without hesitation. "Because I know what it costs now, Your Honor. I know what I lost when I let pride and fear drive Rebecca away. I won't make that mistake again. Lily is not just my daughter. She is my second chance at becoming the man I was meant to be." Finally, despite both lawyers' attempts to protect her from testifying, Judge Thompson called Lily to the stand. The little girl walked forward with quiet dignity, clutching Isabella in one hand and wearing the blue dress Mrs. Henderson had helped her pick out for the occasion. "Lily," the judge said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes." "Ma'am, Aunt Victoria wants me to come live with her, but I want to stay with my daddy. Can you tell me why?" Lily took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Because he chose me. When I was selling my dolls and scared and sad, he stopped and helped me. He didn't have to, but he did. And he's been taking care of me ever since, not because he has to, but because he wants to." "What about your aunt? She's your mother's sister." "I know, but she never wanted to know me before. Mama said Aunt Victoria was ashamed of us because we didn't have a daddy, but now I do have a daddy, and he loves me." Judge Thompson leaned forward. "How do you know he loves you, Lily?" "Because he reads to me every night, even when he's tired from work. Because he learned how to braid my hair even though he's not very good at it. Because he cries sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking, and I think it's because he's sad he missed so many years with me and Mama." Lily's voice grew stronger. "And because when I have nightmares about Mama being gone, he holds me until I'm not scared anymore." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom when Lily finished speaking. Judge Thompson called for a brief recess, and Jonathan knelt down to hug his daughter. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "I'm so proud of you." "We're going to be okay, Daddy," Lily whispered back. "I can feel it." When court reconvened, Judge Thompson's expression was solemn, but decided. "This has been one of the most difficult cases I've had to decide," she began. "On one hand, we have blood families seeking custody. On the other, we have a father who, while he made mistakes in the past, has demonstrated genuine love and commitment to this child's welfare." Jonathan held his breath. "However, the primary consideration must be what is in Lily's best interest. And after hearing all the testimony, it's clear to me that this child has found stability, love, and security in Mr. Pierce's home. The bond between them is evident and genuine. While Ms. Collins may be blood family, she was absent from this child's life when her presence was most needed." Victoria's face went white. "Therefore, I am denying the petition to contest the adoption. Lily Rose Pierce Mitchell will remain in the custody of her adoptive father, Jonathan Pierce." The gavel came down, and Lily launched herself into Jonathan's arms, both of them crying with relief and joy. Mrs. Henderson was sobbing in the gallery, and even Patricia was wiping her eyes. As they left the courthouse together, Lily looked up at Jonathan with those beautiful blue eyes and said, "Now we can have the best Christmas ever." And for the first time in 9 years, Jonathan believed that miracles were possible. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with fresh snow blanketing the grounds of the Pierce estate like a blessing. Jonathan woke to find Lily bouncing on his bed, her face glowing with excitement and her hair a tangle of golden curls. "Daddy, wake up! It's Christmas, and it's snowing. Mrs. Henderson said we can build a snowman after breakfast." Jonathan pulled his daughter into a hug, marveling at how completely his life had changed in just 3 months. The scared, serious little girl who had been selling her dolls on the sidewalk had blossomed into the joyful, secure child she was meant to be. The nightmares had become less frequent, the smiles more genuine, and the trust between them had grown stronger with each passing day. "Merry Christmas, baby girl," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Are you ready to see what Santa brought you?" "Santa didn't bring me anything," Lily said matter-of-factly. "You did, but I like it better that way because it means you were thinking about what would make me happy." Jonathan's heart clenched with love for this wise, perceptive child who saw through the magic to the love beneath. "What makes me happiest is having you here with me." "Me too, Daddy. Mama would be so happy that we found each other." They made their way downstairs to find Mrs. Henderson already in the kitchen, humming carols as she prepared what would surely be a magnificent Christmas breakfast. The tree in the living room was surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. But Jonathan's eyes went immediately to the new addition he had made the night before, a framed photograph of Rebecca that he had enlarged and placed in a place of honor near the fireplace. "You put Mama's picture up," Lily said softly, walking over to touch the frame. "She should be here with us," Jonathan said, kneeling beside his daughter. "She's part of our family always." Lily smiled and picked up a small wrapped box from under the tree, handing it to Jonathan. "This is for you, from me and Mama." Inside was Rebecca's promise ring and a note in Lily's careful handwriting. "For the best daddy in the world, love finds a way." As snow continued to fall outside and Mrs. Henderson called them for breakfast, Jonathan realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. He had found his daughter on a sidewalk, but she had given him something far more precious. She had given him home. "Come on, Daddy," Lily said, taking his hand. "Let's start our new Christmas tradition." And as they walked toward the warmth of the kitchen together, Jonathan knew that every Christmas morning for the rest of his life would begin with gratitude for the day a little girl selling dolls had changed everything.